This is the last event of Charity Trustees Week 2022, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on terrorist financing and money laundering and the risks for charities. We're joined today by Detective Superintendent Katharina Gunn from the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, and by Thomas Mulholland, who is Director of Compliance and Enforcement with the Charities Regulator. A copy of the slides will be shared with all the participants today. And we will also have a recording of the webinar available early next week. We will also have time at the end for some questions, so please feel free to put them into the Q&A function. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Katharina Gunn.
Thank you, Geraldine. Now, I hope you can see my slides there. So I am Detective Superintendent Katharina Gunn. Welcome everybody today to today's event in relation to money laundering and terrorist financing. So what I'm going to talk you through is fraud and cyber-enabled crime, looking twofold as the vulnerability for you as a charity and where you may be exposed in relation to money laundering. Now, so the agenda is the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, the Financial Intelligence Unit, so a little bit of background there, what we actually do, the overview of crime, the COVID pandemic and working from home, and the implications that had, new trends in fraud, the vulnerabilities for you as a charity, reporting matters of criminality to An Garda Síochána, what outreach, what disruption, what prevention are we providing as an organisation, and the risk from within, the human factor. So the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau is where I'm a detective superintendent. I have over 23 years experience, and 21 of those years has been investigating fraud. So I have done every level from guard, sergeant, inspector, and now superintendent within the Bureau. So the Bureau is a specialist division within An Garda Síochána, and our strategic intent is to investigate, prevent, detect, prosecute, and most importantly, disrupt criminals engaged in economic crime. We operate as a national unit. We're supporting and providing guidance and expertise to national fraud investigators. So what we have is this week, it has commenced, we have a fraud investigation course, which is a postgraduate certificate in fraud and e-crime investigations. It's accredited by UCD. So we have 50 Gardaí upskilled each year in that particular area. And then they are disseminated across all the divisions, the 19 divisions. And we then, as a national unit, provide guidance and support to them. So what does the Bureau do? We investigate most serious and complex economic crimes. We also investigate crimes which are of major public concern. So that may be where it'll come in relation to a charity, where for a charity there's some deception or that involving, or it has become a major public concern, well then it can come in to the actual Bureau for investigation. We also investigate money laundering, terrorist financing, and the superintendent over those investigations. And we have an anti-bribery and corruption unit. And that is important because we investigate all domestic and foreign bribery and corruption as per legislation. We also, in that sphere, we have a dedicated answering call service where you can report matters through our dedicated 24/7 telephone line in relation to bribery and corruption. And that may be of particular interest to this particular topic today involving charities where there has been bribery or corruption or allegations of same. So there's a long list there. I'm not going to go through it all, but the slides will be available to you. So there's two superintendents in the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau. My colleague is Detective Superintendent Michael Crine. So the assessment unit is a very important role within the Bureau where matters are referred into the Bureau and they're assessed to see have they reached a prima facie case of criminality. So what you can have is reporting matters into us, and there's a good story there, but where is the fraud? And is it to the level of beyond a reasonable doubt, the evidential requirement in it? And we will engage with you in relation to any reports that come into ourselves, into the Bureau, and they're assessed there. Documentation, what more is needed in order to establish a prima facie case. We have a criminal intelligence officer. We have 4 serious economic crime investigations. There's ongoing charity investigations there, which I won't be commenting on because they're live and ongoing cases, but there is where they are investigated within the Bureau. We have an Insurance Fraud Coordination Office, Financial Services, International Liaison, Payment Card Counterfeit Currency Unit, Divisional Liaison Unit, and now we have a Fraud Prevention and Disruption Office. And I'll go in a little bit to how the Disruption Office later in the slides can be of assistance. So my remit is a superintendent. I have dedicated sworn members and admin support and professionals engaged in what is our remit: prevent, detect, disrupt economic crime. So Financial Intelligence Unit, and the Financial Intelligence Unit is the central reception point of all suspicious transaction reporting. So financial institutions and designated bodies report into the Financial Intelligence Unit any suspicious transactions. So therefore, within charity accounts and that, they may identify something untoward, something suspicious, and it's all on an intelligence gathering basis. Last year, we had in excess of 35,000 suspicious transactions reported into the Financial Intelligence Unit. We have so the Financial Intelligence Unit is broken up into 3 parts. That we have a Terrorist Financing Intelligence Unit section dedicated within it, and we have an International Relations and Policy Unit, and that's in relation to cooperation with EU and international financial intelligence units and sharing of information and getting requests in and disseminating requests out. I'm the superintendent also that has oversight of members of An Garda Síochána who are seconded to the Corporate Enforcement Authority. We would have a memorandum of understanding there, and we would have good engagement there in relation to company offences being investigated by Gardaí down there. Anti-Bribery and Corruption Unit, which is also very relevant to the charity sector. So both, and Corporate Enforcement Authority, very relevant as well, where you have breaches of company law. Money Laundering Investigation Units, I currently have 3, I'm trying to build to 4. And then I also have a sergeant attached to the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. So today, what we're looking at is just things have moved on, like in relation to remote working and working from home as a result of COVID restrictions. And then we've moved on where that blend of working now, that there's a blend of office and home working, and just the exposure, possible exposure there to criminality. So I'm going to go through a little bit of phishing, smishing, social media, business email compromise, and romance fraud and investment fraud. And in this particular, the next few slides, I'm looking at creating awareness out there among you. And if I can reach you and then you're able to share that information with friends, with family members, with colleagues, it's an awareness, and that's the type of outreach that An Garda Síochána wants, is to disrupt, it's to prevent you becoming the next victim of a crime. And I think what I stated in the slide is prevalent, that are you next? And it's all to do with awareness and understanding. So phishing is where you receive an unsolicited email purporting to be from, for example, it could be from your financial controller, it could be from your solicitor, and it's requesting you it's unsolicited and requesting you your personal data or your organization's data. Smishing is where you have an unsolicited text message. Social media is where a lot of the fraudsters are gathering the information. We put a lot out on social media, personal information about personal data and also organizational data. So it's something to be very conscious of. Just in relation to business email compromise, we would have a number of cases where we have organizations that have been the victims of fraud, and charities are not immune to victimization of this particular type of fraud, that charities have been victims. And in some cases, we have been successful and we've been able to recall some of the monies. But again, identifying the fraud at an early stance and reporting the matter as soon as possible to An Garda Síochána, and also working with your financial institution is paramount. So just there in relation to unsolicited emails, business email compromise, what we're seeing is the trend to lull you into a false sense of security. You are receiving maybe a WhatsApp or a text message purporting to be from your financial controller or your CEO. And in that message, it forms part of a thread, a message thread that you have received before from them. So then it lulls you into a false sense of security. Well, it's the same number and it's the same message that he sent me on before. So it lulls people and the guard is down in relation to it. That message may say that I'm out of the country, I'm going into a meeting, there'll always be an urgency attached to it, and I need you to transfer funds for me. And I'm giving the direction now, and I will give a follow-up email. And it's a matter of urgency, or I lose out on a deal and that. So there's always this urgency attached to it. Now with remote working, the guard may be down because it may be a culture within the organisation or that if you were in the office, you may have stopped to think, or you may have ran it by somebody. But when you receive an email like this, that we see an urgency around it, it's my CEO, it's my financial controller, I better do this. Also, what we're seeing with phishing emails, it might be something just very much a letter, a number, something different in the email address, .com, .ie. And that's what you're looking out for, is when you're asked to do something out of the ordinary course of business, where you, and all of this information, where fraudsters are getting you to try and dupe you into cooperating with them, is where you have your information is out maybe for government tender, we are looking for services or that, and they have information and that, and then they're purporting to be a creditor or that, and that they require these funds, or a bank account is changed and asking for your cooperation. Now, we have done numerous outreach in this particular area. We've done fraud awareness weeks and that. And even after today, I will constantly get investment fraud referrals, romance fraud referrals, and business email compromises, because guards are down, and whatever way they're able to get, they're lulling you into a false sense of security, and they're so believable. Some of them are really, really well done, where you have reputable websites are cloned or compromised, and then you're a victim. But again, it'll go back to due diligence, governance in place, and before you click, to think and to run it by somebody. Like, is this out of the norm? To pick up the phone, to ring you, but even with that, would that be something out of the norm of your CEO, and just have governance in place? So investment fraud and romance fraud. You might wonder as why on a charities regulator webinar am I talking about investment fraud and romance fraud? Well, sometimes with charities linked with investments with money and trying to where investments are going, romance fraud is where you have your charities, you have trustees, you have lay people, And people have personal lives. However, their guard may be down when they're involved in a romance where they don't realize they're being a victim of a romance fraud. So just to practically give you some knowledge or understanding behind it, I will relate to a case, a very recent case, where I had dealt with a victim. She was working in the financial sector industry. She struck up a romance over 4 weeks, and after week 3, the suspect who was she was communicating with, she'd never met him. It was all on through social media, through phone calls and social media. There was no meeting, and you won't meet these people. So at 3 weeks into the relationship, he said that he would have to go outside the jurisdiction and that he would not have any internet access. So the calls would be less frequent, and he would ring her as opposed to he wouldn't be in a position to send emails or message her. So at that, she was busy. She was head over heels, all the messages coming up to the 3 weeks, everything looked, she was very, very happy in herself. And then she got a panicked call one day when she was working remotely at home. She got a panicked call that he was having difficulty with transferring funds from one account to another outside the jurisdiction. And the urgency of it was that he had to close a business deal. So when we're working remotely or in an office and we get, this was a very astute person. She had a very good job. And she then, as a result, her guard was down and she transferred funds from one account to another, where she was not a beneficiary. She was given the details and passwords by the suspect. So when she had done it, it didn't sit right with her. And then she began to question the suspect in relation to it, because they were for large amounts. She did that, and then things turned sour. So what happened was the suspect then, because they had been engaging and he had access, she hadn't, what was done then was she was threatened that if she didn't cooperate, send more money, engage with him more, that he would share this among all her contacts list. But another element of it is when you're trustees with a charity and that if you're involved in that, there's other implications there. Not alone is she a victim, she then reports the matter to An Garda Síochána. But because she is in the financial industry, she is governed by fitness and probity under the Central Bank Act. So that the shock hits that you're a victim of fraud. First of all, then she is happy in herself that she hasn't been defrauded. She never gave many details of bank accounts and that. However, she engaged in money laundering, where she moved funds from one account to another that she was not a beneficiary of. So it's just an awareness thing to keep in mind in relation to it. So protecting your charity. So again, and I hope to be working in tandem with what Tom will have in relation to FATF recommendations, and just what is your charity? What is your non-profit organisation? Clearly defined aim or purpose. Your constitution, that it's clear and transparent. Your goals, your objectivity, your charitable purpose. So that is all outlined, and going back in your documentation, that you clearly outline what it is and what the purpose is. Again, we're always on the move. We're always with laptops. We now have the organisation's data and the protection of that data, whether it be on a mobile device, on a laptop, on a desktop. The latest antivirus software encrypt sensitive data. And I know, and I compliment the charities regulator, that they have protecting your, again, strong mandatory passwords, that you have, that there's something that they're not just suggested, that there are a requirement, that strong mandatory unnecessary passwords on all devices. Regular backups, again, that you're not the next victim of a malware attack where all of your data can be, you're held to ransom in relation to your data, and it stops your organization. And again, if you are a victim of a malware attack, that you report the matter to An Garda Síochána, and we would advise that you don't engage with handing over any monies. Secure network connections, avoid public Wi-Fi, because your data is very, very important, and it's your organization. And again, it's to do with your reputation, and people put trust in you that when they're giving over information, giving donations, and that their data is protected and that there is no breaches under data protection. Protecting your charity, again, in relation to organised crime gangs. That is there a vulnerability there? That do you know your employees? Do you know the people you're engaging with, the third parties? That your charity is not being used for the purpose of crime. Looking at diversion of funds raised for charitable purposes, strong internal controls. And one of the things I will say is that trust is not an internal control. And that's something from An Garda Síochána that we can have. And as managers and heads of charities, we have a big thing, the governance structures, the due diligence that you have in place, that you have in the one person, that you have oversight, that you have internal governance within signing off on things, that you have controls in place, that you have a number of people and a number of procedures and protocols that people have to follow. Targeted risk-based supervision or monitoring of not-for-profit organisations. So where's the exposure, where's the risk? And again, there's other risks than money laundering and terrorist financing, that you as a charity, the risk of human trafficking, the risk of sexual exploitation, and that charitable purpose, that when you are going in outside the jurisdiction, inside the jurisdiction, that you're not being used, that your charity isn't being used, that when you are sending vehicles in, when you have particularly third world countries and that it's not being utilised for, and that you're aware and there's governance around that. Due diligence around donations from shell companies or donors in high risk jurisdictions. So that's what you as trustees and that are looking out for. No logical purpose to transactions. There's no link to the charity's purpose. So your money flows when you're doing your reports for the regulator, that you're looking at the transactions. And again, you're looking at what is the purpose of them? And then that goes back to your constitution. What is the purpose of the charity? And that the monies linked to that charity are being used for the intended purpose. Trade-based money laundering is not something we're seeing in charities. However, it could be that where you're getting equipment and that sending out equipment abroad, that you're dealing with reputable third parties, that you're dealing with that when you're a charity, that it's not numerous invoices and that, and just something to be aware of, but it's not something we're seeing. It's very difficult to, with the small amounts, you can have lone actors in relation to terrorist financing. But what you would look at is high-risk jurisdictions in relation to destination of funds, outsizations. What's the type of accounts, multiple accounts to collect and channel funds if it's outside the norm. Dissatisfied with the source of funds. So again, trusting your gut and questioning the actual funds. We've moved on now in relation to economic crime. The ingenuity of fraudsters. In the pandemic, it was seen as an increase where we had, the country was on lockdown, but cyber-enabled fraud increased as a result then, that the ingenuity of fraudsters. They're looking at the vulnerability. You are working remotely, your guard is down and you're transferring from a front kitchen a lot of money. And the governance in place, that what protocols, what procedures have you? So we've moved on, transformed from a cottage industry into highly organised global networks. There is no borders for fraudsters. They can, international elements. We have an organised crime strategy where we're looking at all echelons of the hierarchy, the low-hanging fruit, be it money mules, herders, facilitators, the challenge of technology, that you have spoof and where spoof calls, and phishing, vishing and smishing, and compromise where your data is exposed to be compromised. And what we are doing is we are looking at the disruption piece. And for example, with the central bank, we look at unregulated lenders, and we're taking down websites. So then for today, in relation to that you're aware of purporting to be a charity, that it's not, contact An Garda Síochána in relation to it. But with that allegation that you're able, before we take down a website or engage with the service providers of taking down a website, we would have to be very clear of the criminal intent with it. Money moving at the speed of light. So that's what we find with economic crime, that hundreds of thousands are being transferred, and it's very difficult to get that money back, and time is of the essence. However, we've had some great successes in collaboration with the Financial Intelligence Unit, with our colleagues abroad, other financial intelligence units, and international, Interpol, Europol, and international cooperation. So Gardaí at the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau are utilising organised crime legislation. So economic crime in the past, where you would arrest and detain a fraudster, you had a limit of 24 hours. If it's an organised crime group engaged in the fraud, in the economic crime, you have up to a week. And we have been utilising that legislation. And it is a week where organised crime would be for a murder, but with economic crime you can have with the sanction of a judge, so it's a superintendent, chief superintendent and judge, to extend those detentions, and what the norm is 3 to 4 days. Directions to charge a number of people with organised crime offences, so it's more serious. We're seeing greater sentences in relation to the severity of the crime. More time, and I said that again, for interviews, and fraud by its very nature, that we have a lot of documentation, and we're seeing increased sentences. So using that strategy within the Bureau in the last number of years, we have arrested in excess of 100 people under that. It's very important to report the financial crime quickly. So in relation to charities that have been defrauded with business email compromise, the most important thing for any victim of economic crime is the recall of the money. And the person best placed to recall the money is the beneficiary of the account. So the beneficiary of the account gets onto the financial institution and looks for a recall. And that's the type of terminology you're using, is you're looking for a recall to try and get the funds back. GNECB responds by taking immediate action. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, it was a reputable investing company had their email compromised, and they had their website and compromised, and 300,000, an 86-year-old victim who had investment of 300,000 was defrauded, and it was reported 11 days later. 200,000 was recovered. So that's the work of the outreach, that's the work of the collaboration with Europol, with Interpol, and with our law enforcement officers overseas. In excess of 30 million to date in the last number of years have been recovered from Hong Kong. So that's great working relationship. Your obligations, okay, for reporting. So under section 19, so you have an obligation to report. So a person who is guilty of an offence, if he or she knows that they have information, or they may have or believe that they have information which might be of material assistance to preventing the commission of a crime, So, and if they fail to disclose that information, it's the preventing of the, or it'll secure the apprehension or the prosecution of a suspect. So you have, as a charity, and you're looking at the report that's been done, or you're looking at the monies and that coming in relation to your charity, and that you have a suspicion that there's fraudulent behaviour, or that you have an obligation to report under Section 19. Most Section 19 reports, you can report that here at the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, but with your assertion that you're backing it up with what are you alleging, the fraud that you're alleging, and telling the story why. Also, as charities, you are operating, a number of you are operating outside the jurisdiction, and just be conscious, countries you are supporting, that your awareness of their reporting obligations as well. Because just in relation to the Anti-Bribery and Corruption Unit, that you have, we have a remit there that Irish nationals living abroad, that corruption there, that they are investigated. FATF guidelines, Tom will go into this in more detail, but the bread and butter of it is governance, transparency and due diligence. Now, just in relation to governance and all of that, I dropped my son today at creche. It's National Pajama Day. It's great to see the charities. The charity in that particular instance is As I Am has been supported this year. But even the governance around the charity donations and that, how they're coming in. And I was looking this morning where there was sealed envelopes of cash going in, but then there was parents that didn't have those particular envelopes and were just handing cash to staff members. And a lot of what we have is charities and goodwill. We're reliant on the goodwill of people and doing the right thing. So it's trust, it's culture, it's ethics, it's all of those things in relation to it, that it gets to its proper destination for the charitable purpose that it's intended. Very important is your reputation as a charity, that how this money gets to you and what it is used for, that your reputation then. So within An Garda Síochána, we do a lot of outreach. Today is one of those. We utilise the Garda Press Office. We have a Fraud Awareness Week. We do press releases. The disruption piece in relation to websites, that not reputable websites. I'm also conscious that GoFundMe pages and funding methods that are used. But if you have like lotteries and all that, you need a license. They're all regulated by An Garda Síochána for that license. But in relation to GoFundMe pages, if you have a suspicion there that it's not, that there is a fraud there, then report the matter to An Garda Síochána. We hold conferences, webinars, we go into schools where we have children, our college goers, our school children, secondary school children, college goers are being targeted by organised crime gangs in relation to money mule accounts. So just again, and I know I'm running over time, so I'm just conscious in relation to the risk within the insider threat and the risk assessment of what is your constitution, what's your goal as an organisation. So you need good people in order to achieve that goal. So due diligence around your staff, around your management, temporary staff. Have you done your due diligence? Okay, charities will not be subject to vetting unless the only vetting is where you're working directly with children. So just be aware of external contractors, your due diligence with third-party providers. And for example, we have an ongoing investigation where an external contractor for payroll, they had an insider threat within, and data was compromised of a firm where all their top level managers had their personal data compromised, and then the PUP payment was applied for in their names. And it didn't come until a year later where you have the revenue implications on those payments. Who are you employing? Do you know who you're employing? Looking at, so in the absence of vetting, it's up to you to utilize, look at past history, CVs, look at open source, look at the references, and question in relation to any transactions, anything that you see is outside the norm. So I'll be available for questions after, and I would just like to thank you for your time today. Just and end up on that, we have a great working relationship at the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau with the charities regulator. And thank you to both Geraldine and Thomas for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. That was very, very interesting, if a bit scary at times. I now hand over to Thomas Mulholland, who is the Director of Compliance and Enforcement at the Charities Regulator. And just to say, we have time at the end for questions, and I know we've seen some coming through, and we take those when Tom's finished. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just share my screen there. I hope you can see the slides. So, okay, so the topic we're all here for today is money laundering and terrorist financing. So my name is Tom Mulholland. I've already been introduced, Director of Compliance and Enforcement with the Charities Regulator. So just want to bring it back to basics here for a start. So let's just focus for a minute on what is money laundering. So money laundering is the process of concealing the illegal origin of proceeds derived from crime. So in other words, money laundering is about getting whatever cash or whatever monies have been got and concealing that, laundering those funds so that they look legitimate. Okay, now one of the key characteristics of money laundering is that the funds always come from an illegal source. Okay, so some kind of illegal activity. Terrorist financing is slightly different in that this is the provision, collection, or receipt of funds intending or knowing that these funds will be used to support or carry out an act of terrorism. So in other words, this is the people who are ultimately organising the collection of the funds or whatever. They know that these funds are ultimately going to be used for terrorism. Now, obviously, they're going to try and conceal that fact, but that's the definition of terrorist financing. And the difference between terrorist financing and money laundering is under terrorist financing, the funds can come from both legal and illegal sources. So you can have you could have a charity with legitimate purposes, but some of the funds are going to be ultimately going to be used for terrorist financing, and that is a possibility. Now, there is a guidance document on our website. I'll just bring that to your attention on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing for charities. That's a detailed document that's available on our website. So money laundering and terrorist financing, the question is, why worry about it? Why should the ordinary charity worry about these things? You know, they seem to be fairly, kind of highbrow, or, maybe for bigger charities or for bigger entities. Why should a charity worry about money laundering? And the reason why, the Charities Regulator is interested in this whole area is there's an organization, it's called FATF, okay? It's the Financial Action Task Force, but it's referred to as FATF. This was originally set up a number of years ago to combat money laundering. It was originally set up by the G7, an organization. After September 9/11 in 2001, the mandate of FATF was expanded, greatly expanded to include terrorist financing. So the thinking behind it was, in order to combat terrorist financing, we'll get, to terrorism, if we try and cut off the financing for terrorism, it can reduce the effect of, how effective terrorists can be. And that's the reality of the world we're in. That this is the kind of thing that charities and everybody has to be worried about. So FATF is an international body, and it reviews the actions taken by countries in relation to, in what steps each country takes to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. Okay, so they actually carry out reviews. So the FATF will arrive in the country. There's a schedule where they go to every country periodically, every number of years, and to see what systems are in place, and they make recommendations about what can be improved in different jurisdictions. And just to let you know as well, FATF also publish a list of countries which they designate as high risk. Okay, so high risk countries would be the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, as you probably know it better as, Iran, and Myanmar. So these are countries called high risk, have been defined as high risk countries by FATF. But there's also a list of jurisdictions which they term increased monitoring. So these are countries which need to take stronger steps to combat to money laundering and terrorist financing, and they haven't taken sufficient steps to date. Okay, and there's a long list there. Now, there's a lot of countries there, say like Albania, and I'm going to pick up another couple there, Morocco, Turkey, Yemen. These are countries that perhaps charities would have transactions with. Gibraltar is on that list, the Cayman Islands. So the question for a charity would be, if a charity has some kind of transactions or some kind of connection with those countries, they need to be aware of this, that this country is subject to increased monitoring, and the reputation of the charity, is it going to be affected if it comes to light that a charity is dealing with these jurisdictions. Now, having said that, charities by their very nature may have operations in some of these countries. So say for a country like Yemen, a very a war-torn country, and a charity may be set up specifically with the purpose of providing aid in Yemen. So that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as long as the charity is aware that this is a risk, it's been highlighted as a risk by this international body, FATF, and that the charity takes steps to mitigate that risk. Okay, so it's just not that you can't have transactions with those countries; it's that you mitigate. You're aware of that it could be a risk, and that the charity would take steps to mitigate the risk. Okay, so like I said, FATF carries out periodic reviews, and in the most recent reviews, a number of years ago, it was identified that Ireland needed to take further steps in relation to what they called Recommendation 8, which is combating the abuse of non-profit organisations. Okay, so charities form part of the non-profit sector in Ireland. So it's been internationally recognised by FATF that non-profit organisations or charities can be used. I'm not saying they're all used, or they are at risk of being used for money laundering purposes or for terrorism financing. And so FATF has highlighted that risk in relation to Ireland and said that Ireland needs to take more steps to combat. So one of the steps that's been taken is that there's outreach like this to make charities and not-for-profits aware these are live issues that need to be dealt with by charities. So there's risks arising specifically in relation to charities. And how are charities at risk? Well, as Katrina mentioned earlier on, charities generally enjoy goodwill. So everyone, assumes that, naturally enough, that charities are acting for the good of society, that people are on the up and up, so to speak. She meant to give the example earlier on of people handing over cash, for this pajama day today. So everyone, that wouldn't be normal procedure. If I was standing outside that school, there's no way anybody would be handing me €10 notes. But, because it was for a charity, people assume that things have been done right, and that's natural. The generosity of people in Ireland is well known. But that can lead to, maybe the charity may be subject to less scrutiny. So that's why it would be attractive to a criminal, that if they can somehow get access to the charity, get control of it, or be some kind of way associated, it may be subject to less scrutiny because people say, it's a charity, there's no need to worry about that so much. And that's why it can actually be a risk for a charity. So charity trustees need to be aware of their responsibilities, and they need to be alert to the possibility of the charity being misused. And that is a possibility. Charities can be misused. So like I said earlier on, illegal activities generate cash, and criminals want to bring that cash into the banking system. That's what's called money laundering. And a charity would be a great cover for that, because a charity is expected to generate cash. It's expected to have cash collections on the street, etc. So there is a legitimacy there already. If a charity can be used, it's not unusual for a charity to, get, random or, amounts of money, cash coming into it on occasion. So if funds can be channeled through a charity, illegal funds can be channeled through a charity, they could acquire a veil of legitimacy. Okay. So in other words, when illegal cash is coming into a charity, if somebody can get their hands on that out of the charity again, it looks like genuine money that came from a charity. It's not going to be questioned. So, if somebody can get funds into a charity and then get a check issued or get a transfer out of the charity, the funds have been cleaned. That's what money laundering is. And I'll give you an example, just a random example, where if somebody were to approach charity and say, look, we want to organize clothing collections on behalf of the charity. Look, don't worry about it. We'll organize everything. You just have to reap the benefits. Every so often they provide cash to the charity and say, this is the proceeds of the clothing collections. But look, we've had some expenses here, and here's our list of our expenses, and we want to be reimbursed for that. And they get a check back from the charity. there's funds there after handing over cash and getting the check back. And the money is that they've basically laundered that money. So that's an example of how simple these things can be. And obviously, like I said, I've already mentioned, charities may actually operate in at-risk jurisdictions, I've already, like, Turkey or Yemen. And the attraction again for charity, if they want to transfer funds to that jurisdiction, and they don't want to draw attention to the fact, if they can add it on to funds that's already been transferred there by the charity, if they could add on, if there was, 10,000 euro being transferred to Yemen, and some criminals decided, well, if they could get 2,000 added on to that and it'd be taken off the other side. It's a way to get around, checks and balances, if they can add on funds that they want to transfer. It's also possible that a charity may be directly involved in terrorist financing. And that's actually a reality here in Ireland. Fundraising can be carried out here by legitimate means. It can be, saying the purpose may be given that, it's the education of children in a war-torn country. And when the funds get out to that country, they're actually used to buy supplies for the terrorist group. So charity trustees in Ireland may or may not be aware of this. And, that's the challenge for charity trustees in Ireland, is that if funds are being sent abroad, what checks and balances, how are you getting comfort that the funds are actually being used for the purpose of which you're, making all the effort to generate and send out there? And it can be difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but, a charity should be taking steps to make sure that, the funds that they generate are actually used for the purpose for which they were generated. And, the reality is, we're here in Ireland, which is obviously has very strong systems and checks in place. I don't know if you've tried to open a bank account recently. It's like such a struggle between ID and, having to attend at the bank and, proof of address and all the rest of it. And we kind of take those things for granted, but you have to be aware in other countries, there may not actually be a functioning banking system at all. Especially in some charities may work, like I say, it may again be operating in, very, countries with, with huge issues, in war zones, and there may not be a functioning banking system. And, standards of checks that are in place in Ireland may not be in place. And again, that's a challenge for charity trustees. How do you get around that? How do you put proper systems in place to make sure funds are used properly? And that is a real challenge. Now, another issue that comes up in relation to charities, under Section 59, the Charities Act 2009, charity trustees must report suspected fraud to charity regulators. And that's a requirement for all charity trustees. If there's a fraud, or if you suspect that there's a fraud in your charity, you must report to the charity regulator. Now, we would expect, obviously, that you would report that to An Garda Síochána as well. That, if you suspect a fraud in a charity, you've reported, as Katrina already mentioned earlier on, obligation to report to An Garda Síochána. And again, you have an obligation to report to the charity regulator. And it is a requirement under Section 59 of the Charities Act. And we regularly do receive these notifications. And one of the most common ones we receive is in relation to the invoice redirection fraud. And it's so simple. And again, Katrina has actually mentioned it as well, where somebody just gets an email in. So a charity is there to get an email in to say to change the bank details for a supplier. They just change the bank details and then discover, 3 weeks or a month later, because their supplier is ringing them up saying we haven't got the funds, and it's suddenly discovered, well, that was a fraudulent email. Now, you would think, that is so common, and it's been, highlighted so many times that nobody would fall for that anymore, but it still happens. It still happens on a regular basis. And, so how do you stop that? Procedures should be in place. There should be financial procedures in place that, bank account details cannot be changed on the strength of an email. That, if you receive an email, you have to make a follow-up phone call to that entity to check that that email is accurate, to check the details in the email, and also that there would be two people signing off within the charity. So in other words, it's not one person with the power who's the ability to change payment details. It would require at least two people. And that way, there's going to be, if something looks off, there's more chance of people questioning it, of catching out these, this attempted fraud. And again, the other example, we regularly receive these Section 59 notifications, whereas an email is sent to everybody in charity, supposedly from the CEO saying, oh, I urgently need payment. and somebody, if they send it to everybody in the whole charity, there's a chance that, if there's 100 people in the charity, that one of them will fall for it and transfer funds. And again, it turns out to be subsequently, that the CEO never actually sent that email. So again, like as Katrina had said earlier on, there should be checks and balances in place, that, there should be a phone call made, or, that an email is just not the purpose, the basis on which a payment can be made. Also, the reality for charities in Ireland is that we regularly receive requests for information about charities and charities trustees from An Garda Síochána. And again, Katrina has already mentioned there, we have a close working relationship with An Garda Síochána, and we actually receive requests when they are investigating items of money laundering or terrorist financing, where they put a request into us in relation to charities or individuals working in charities. So that is, that just brings home to you the reality of, that these things are actually happening in charities on the ground. This is not, theoretical topics that we're talking about. We've also become aware in the charities regulator of instances where, a charity has literally gone to the bank, withdrawn cash, put into a suitcase, and flown cash out to another country. Now that creates so many risks for so many, different avenues. Even the risk of the person walking out of the bank with the money in the suitcase. It would somewhat beg our belief, but we have come across that happening in charities in Ireland. And the question is, does that happen in your charity? And is it appropriate? What safeguards are in place? We've also had instances where charities have held funds on behalf of individuals or organisations not directly connected to the charity and allowed their bank accounts to be used. So in other words, this is a charity which has allowed somebody who, an organisation, an unregistered entity, just to use their bank account. Like, again, it doesn't sound believable. That's genuine, has occurred, where charity allows somebody else to use the charity bank account. And again, there's so many risks involved with that. It's charity trustees should never allow anybody only, the funds of the charity or the bank account of the charity should only be used for the charity and to further the charitable purpose of the charity only. It can't be used to help out somebody else, or to, if somebody needs to transfer funds abroad, they can transfer funds abroad however they like, but they cannot use the charity bank account to do it. So that's what I'm saying. So charities need to be aware that terrorism isn't just a foreign issue. Like, when we talk about terrorism, it's not just in other jurisdictions. It's an issue we have to deal with here in Ireland as well. Criminals may try to take advantage of the lack of procedures or the fact that trustees are volunteers. So in other words, it has to be recognised. Charity trustees, they're not going to be, or in the main, they're not going to be financial professionals. They're not going to be, dealing with this kind of, money laundering on a daily basis or being aware of the risks of it. But, they have to, charity trustees have to be aware of it. They have to take appropriate steps. There has to be procedures in place to deal with, the risk of money laundering, with the risk of terrorist financing. And again, there's another guidance document. I'm going to finish off with this, which is the risk register. So that's a guidance document that's available on our website, Risk Management for Charities. And again, one of the areas of risk that should be considered by a charity is the possibility of money laundering and the possibility of terrorist financing. So that's it. Thanks very much.